Welcome to the video. The house is on fire. The tsunami is roaring in and the floodwaters are rising. I've got no time or I'm running out of time. So I run up to my listening room and I've only got time to pick one album by my favorite artist or bands. One album only. Which one am I going to go for? And in doing so, why am I leaving behind the others? So, and a little bit of a twist on the ranking style of video. I thought what I'd do is I'd focus on a handful of artists that I've listened to for many years, but I can't say hand on heart I know every single album intimately enough to do a proper full ranking video. And those of you who've done it know that to do a ranking video justice, you have to listen to all the albums one or two times again in order to refresh your memory, because like everyone else here, I've got albums in this library here that I haven't listened to frequently enough, some not for many years, to be firm in my assessment as to why these albums are good, bad, or indifferent. So my job is to select one album only, and this is the first in a series of videos that I hope to do in the coming weeks. So today's artist is Joni Mitchell. So everyone loves Joni Mitchell, don't they? Well, what do we think about Joni Mitchell? She's a living legend. She's a national treasure. She's confessional. She's open. She's experimental. She's fierce. She's wise. She is one of the great grandees of the pop and rock music industry. And one of the things that I didn't realize is how early she'd been making music. I picked up this album just in 2023, which is early Joni, 1963. It's like I think it's like an audition tape. It's really quite good. But anyway, more of Joni's albums. I'm going to get to the point where I will choose one album. But let me start by talking about the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones I saw in 1982 in Newcastle at St James's Park, which is the football stadium there. And it was good. I mean, the sound, as I recall it, it wasn't brilliant. It was a big open air gig, and I was used to going to the Newcastle City Hall, or the Mayfair, which was a kind of Mayfair ballroom, smaller venue, 1,000 people maybe, at City Hall 2,000. So you go to the stadium, and there's about 30,000 people can get in. And it's kind of an enjoyable gig, and I really liked the Some Girls album and Black and Blue, and I was really looking forward to hearing a lot of those more recently released tracks. Instead, I left with the impression that the Rolling Stones in 1982 were a bit like a karaoke band, and I say that because they played a lot of those hits from the 60s and the very early 70s. And I thought, here is a band that is still producing good work, and yet they're kind of locked in. The demand from their fans or their management is to say, you've got to scratch that itch that people want to hear. Let's spend the night together, or any honky tonk women, or any of those phenomenal 60s hits. And it's only like a few weeks ago that we had Hackney Diamonds released, to a great fanfare, best album in years, return to form. And I don't know about you, but a few weeks later on, Hackney Diamonds is kind of retreated into the Rolling Stones catalogue. And then when people are thinking about the Rolling Stones and the best albums, they go right the way back to the 60s again. Anyway, with that diversion, I think Joni Mitchell has had the same problem. Now, most of you will either have this or know this album. This is Blue. This is her but about a fifth album or something like that. Maybe fifth. Yeah, fifth album, I think. And it regularly appears on the top 100, 200, 500 lists of greatest albums of all time. And when you ask anyone about you say it now, sitting around, oh, I like Joni Mitchell's music. It's great. And I said, oh yeah, I like Joni Mitchell. I had Blue when I was in college, and it was just such a great album. Like, yeah, Blue again. Yeah, good album, by the way. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But everywhere you look, everyone says when it comes to Joni Mitchell, just like the Rolling Stones, she's locked in. It's kind of time stood still. And despite all the fantastic work that she continued to do after the release of this album, this is the benchmark. I don't think it's her best album. And this is not the one I'm saving from the fire, the tsunami, or the flood. I'm going to take another one. So, how did I get exposed to Joni Mitchell after that long preamble? How did I get exposed to her? It was through this band, Nazareth. And the track, This Flight Tonight. Now, this is a reissue. I didn't have this album until maybe 20 years ago. But they released a version of This Flight Tonight, and I used to have that on single. I was looking for it the other day, but I couldn't find it. On the Mooncrest label, they did a fantastic version of This Flight Tonight, which is from the album Blue. And I thought, this is great, really good. And I wasn't buying Joni Mitchell in the early 1970s. It was just later on when I was just reading weekly music magazines, and people kept, critics kept mentioning Joni Mitchell every now and again. And I had this Flight Tonight in the back of my mind, and I was thinking, oh, I really need to find the album where Joni Mitchell sings the original version of This Flight Tonight. And of course, it's on Blue. So I picked up that album, and that's when my Joni Mitchell journey started. So I think when I think about Joni, I think about basically three periods to her career. There's the early period, which I had that very early period, and that's a pre first album release that's just come out from the Joni Mitchell archives. It's really good. And what's remarkable here, it's a concert in 1967. There's a lot of familiar songs here. So she was holding back songs for her albums for a few years before they got their official releases. But anyway, she was good then, no doubt about it. And then there's the first album, Song to a Seagull, and then Clouds, which is great. But all of these albums, I say all of them, the first album, this album, and maybe Ladies of the Canyon, they display that folky style that she has. And I've never really got away with that folky style with Joni Mitchell so much. I can appreciate, I was listening to this just a couple of days ago, and it's fabulous. It's a great album. And there's a wonderful track on side 2 called The Fiddle and the Drum, which is the penultimate track, where it's basically a cappella, and she sings absolutely beautifully. And you've got Both Sides Now, which was the hit single, and the one that she's probably most noted for even today. So that's a great album. But I always found her voice a little bit reminiscent, on reflection, of Joan Baez. Joan Baez had that ability to go really high, but what she had over Joni Mitchell is that Joan Baez could go high and sustain the note, or do it with control. And I feel in these early albums with Joni Mitchell that the folk style, the singing is mostly good, but when she hits that high note, it wobbles a little bit to me, and it becomes shrill, and it's just never really appealed to me that much. Her voice started to deepen a little bit when she did Ladies of the Canyon, and this also has some great tracks on it as well. The ones that are Big Yellow Taxi, of course, the second biggest hit, or the biggest hit, depending on what your view is. The Circle Game closes the album, and of course the original version of Woodstock. All the lyrics there, of course, as well. So another good album I listened to a couple of days ago. And then we ended up with Blue, which is kind of the end of her kind of folk period, really. This is a very sparse. All these albums, there's a little bit more instrumentation in Ladies of the Canyon, but most of these albums have got very little musical accompaniment beyond piano and acoustic guitar. This one has dulcimer on it, which I don't like. I don't think it's a very expressive instrument at all. But one of the reasons why she's so well regarded is that she was really precocious and independent when she was young, and she went through a series. She ended up down in Laurel Canyon in California, hanging out with Crosby, Stills, and Nash, and she was romantically associated with Nash and James Taylor, and but she was that had that fierce independence about her, and she documented her relationships. And it's not completely autobiographical, I understand, but she documented her relationships in a very confessional style, and it was different to other female folk singers around at the time. Um, that first person stuff that was kind of her unique selling proposition, and it really captured the imagination of people who wanted to know the ins and outs of all these Laurel Canyon relationships. And because because her voice, because she was also, she was kind of a poet as well, so her lyrics were absolutely superb as well. So she was undoubtedly incredibly talented, which goes without saying. I wouldn't be doing this video otherwise. But critics latched onto this one as the big confessional album. Anyway, my judgment on that album: great tracks, little bit too much, even though it's quite a short album, 35 minutes or something like that. I understand it's just too sparse and too samey. And I think by this time, she'd done 4 or 5 albums, and she needed to branch out and change her style a little bit. And then we go into phase 2, Joni. And by the way, even though I'm going to be loading a number of albums here and choosing my favorite, the one I'm going to save, there is a real turkey in Joni Mitchell's catalog, and I'm going to talk about that towards the end. And it's not just a little turkey; it's a huge turkey. Anyway, so she produced Court and Spark, which I think is her biggest selling album in the whole of her career, where we started to hear these jazz stylings started to come into her music. And when she was young, apparently she had polio, and meant that when she recovered, there was some limitations on her ability to play the acoustic guitar or guitar with regular tunings. Now, musicians out there will know what I'm talking about. I don't quite know what I'm talking about here because I don't play an instrument. But it mean that she adapted her style, and it created these different chords that made her sound increasingly unique as time went by. And during this album and the period that followed, she started to work much more explicitly, not with folkies or Crosby, Stills and Nash types, but with jazz musicians who kind of wanted to work with her because what she was doing was interesting and beyond the typical singer-songwriter stuff. So this album is very, very famous. Free Man in Paris is on this. Help Me, Raised on Robbery, Car on a Hill. Yeah, it's a good album. Not my favorite by a million miles. But anyway, good album. Then she went on to this fabulous album, Hissing of Summer Lawns. And even more jazzy, even more experimental. And here you've got In France They Kiss on Main Street opens, very experimental with the synthesizer, the jungle line, the percussive boho dance, of course, but you've got Don't Interrupt the Sorrow, Edith and the Kingpin, Harry's House, and Shadows and Light, which has got the keyboard wash. It's almost like a hymn. It closes the album. Good album. And then she went on to produce Hejira, and this is a real contender for the best album, the one I'm going to save. So I might come back to this one a little bit later, but this opens with the magnificent Coyote, beautiful Amelia, the Song for Sharon, Refuge of the Roads. It's just absolutely jam-packed with great tracks. So I'm going to keep that one in close proximity because I might come back to that one. Then she did Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, where she's all of these people here in makeup, double album, more like Hejira. Again, she's now got people like Jaco Pastorius playing bass guitar. So she's now got proper, credible jazz musicians in her band. And then she kind of went the whole hog when she met Charles Mingus, and they did a bit of a collaboration, and then Joni finished the album off because Mingus was on his last legs, and a leg and a half, I think, because he had one leg amputated. But anyway, this is another very jazz inflected album, but it's got some dialogue and some kind of talking from Charles Mingus in there as well. But that's a really interesting album as well. And then the 80s came along. It's kind of, she'd worn out the folk stylings and she needed to do something different. She moved into jazz. And then the 80s came along, and then she did a series of albums that started to embrace rock. And she did this one, While Things Run Fast, which is a very rock album. Chinese Cafe, Unchained Melody, While Things Run Fast is a rock track, and she was touring with a rock band by this time. But yeah, really good album. Then she did Doggy Dog, which is kind of more of the same. What have we got on here? Yeah, nothing. Well, Good Friends, Fiction, Three Great Stimulants, Tax Free, Doggy Dog, and so on and so forth. These are all pretty good albums. Got that early 80s sheen on them. Pretty good, but not so memorable in terms of individual tracks. And then she went back, I think, to more of the sound that she had with Hejira, which is less rock, still with that little bit of jazz, but playing with more sparse instrumentation. With these little accompaniments in the background, just to give it a bit of color. And she did a couple of outstanding albums in my judgment. One is Chalkmark in a Rainstorm, and this one has got My Secret Place on it, and My Secret Place has got Peter Gabriel on backing vocals, or it's a duet really. So this is great. Lakota is wonderful. She's working with Larry Klein now, who's a bass player. So Jaco Pastorius had been and gone by now, and Klein became her kind of producer and lover at the time. Tea Leaf Prophecy, Cool Water. It's got Dancing Clown on it, which, it's got Billy Idol and Tom Petty on it. I mean, Billy Idol singing on a Joni Mitchell album. It's not the best judgment in my not the best decision in my judgment. Cool Water, Recurring Dream. Yeah, this is a really solid album. And then she did Night Ride Home, and this was as close to Hejira as I think she did. And here we've got the title track, which is wonderful. Cherokee Louise, Slouching Towards Bethlehem, Coming from the Cold, which is an absolute classic. Nothing Can Be Done. Yeah, this is definitely recommended. It's absolutely solid album. And that was kind of where the big hiatus came in there. She kind of worked out her career in the music business. She was now concentrating more on her artwork, of which she's prolific. And you pick up the later albums, and there's loads of examples of prints of Joni's artwork. And she did a lot of the covers, and particularly in the 1970s or late 60s, 1970s, she did the covers. So she's kind of not doing much in the music business, and then this pops up out of the blue. Shine, I think this is 2005 or 2007 or something like that. 2007. This has got a version of Big Yellow Taxi on it, but I bought this on CD, and it was just I was starting to think. Well, let me just say, there's a couple of other things as well. A couple of things she said. She did. Where are they? A couple of CDs. Oh yeah. No. Where are they? Here we go. She did Turbulent Indigo following Night Ride Home, which is considered to be a classic. But I'll have to say, by this time, I'm growing a bit tired of Joni's music. And it was starting to sound all too much the same, really. And then she did Taming the Tiger, which is similar stuff as well. And then the hiatus came. And then she popped up with Shine. And I had this on CDs, I was saying. And I didn't give it much of a listen. I thought, well, Joni's released a new album, first one in a while. Let's just buy it and give it a spin. I didn't really get into it until I bought the vinyl just a year or two ago. And for some reason, just listening to it in a more concentrated fashion, just brought out more of the subtleties of the album. So I'm well impressed with this particular album. It's, again, I would definitely recommend it, but not for the casual listener. And then finally, to kind of more or less finish off her career, she did this two albums which were orchestrated, and this one's Both Sides Now, of which she does quite a few American standards in amongst new versions, orchestrated versions of her own songs. And I said I was going to talk about a turkey, and this is the turkey travelogue. It's a double CD. If they released this on vinyl, which I don't think they have done, they would have to produce 4 LPs, I think. It's long, but feels longer. You know, I'm all for what I liked about Joni Mitchell. Great voice, because, you know, once Ladies of the Canyon had passed and Blue had passed, and she was getting into Court and Spark, and Summer Lawns, Hejira, her voice started to deepen. She rounded off the shrillness at the very top end, and her voice became, you know, full of gravitas, and you know, you can just sense that wisdom that was growing in her lyrics as well. But the way she delivered it, the voice was absolutely great. And so by this time, which I think this is when was this released? I can't remember. I can't remember when it was released. But anyway, double CD, 4 LP box set if it ever gets released. And even though I'm missing pieces here, but even if I go back to talking about Joni Mitchell's my favorite albums, she always had that dominant voice, but she had this musical accompaniment that was quite economical and just serviced the song really well. But here you've got the orchestrations are done by, it doesn't matter who it's done by, but it's kind of overseen by Larry Klein. And it's like when you're watching a Hollywood movie where, you know, when you're watching a movie and you've got like an orchestrated orchestral soundtrack, and you come to the last 5 minutes of the movie, and the music begins to soar, and, you know, someone's wandering off into the sunset, and the music is kind of just swelling, and it just fits the mood perfectly. It like kind of rounds off, it helps resolve the movie perfectly. Well, imagine that kind of surging, soaring music imposed from the beginning of CD 1 all the way through to CD 2, end of CD 2. And it's just too much. It's competing with Joni's voice. You can just about hear the lyrics, and it's like they're in competition. So whoever did the orchestrations, I think it was really misguided. So I've never listened to the whole of this album. I get to about halfway through the first disc, and I want to sling it in the bin. I think it's an absolute misguided project. It's a turkey of an album. Don't buy that. The individual tracks, if they pop up now and again, they sound great. Amelia sounds great, for example. But one after another of lush, syrupy orchestrations competing with Joni herself, it just turns it into an absolute bore fest. Maybe a bit like this video. Right. So what's my favorite album? What album am I going to save? So that's kind of a walkthrough of her career, which album I'm going to save. Well, I'm very, very tempted to save Hejira. On another day, this one might be the one I grab first. Not least because I got about 3 copies of it. So even if I make a mistake, I'll find it easily. But the album I'm going to save is the live album, Shadows and Light, from 1980. And this is where she was touring the Mingus album. And it's jam-packed full of Hissing of Summer Lawns, Court and Spark, Mingus, Reckless Daughter, Hejira tracks, with Woodstock in here as well. Fantastic band. This is available on a DVD, so it's definitely worth seeing. It's a jazz band. It's got Jaco Pastorius. It's got Don Elias on percussion, drum kit, but a lot of conga work in there. Don Elias worked with Miles Davis in the early 70s, early mid 70s. Jaco, of course, was in Weather Report. You've got the wonderful Pat Metheny on guitar, the lead guitar, doing the solo work on top of Joni's guitar, and Lyle Mayers on keyboards. And it also has in backing vocals, it's got the wonderful Persuasions. And this is, if you ever find this album, definitely pick it up. It's a whole album only of voices, no instrumentation apart from the voice. And it's a wonderful album. Street Corner Symphony, great version of People Get Ready on there. So what's so great about this album? It's Joni in complete control. It's all that experimental stuff, all that personality just comes through in spades on this album. So even though she's got this crack band around her, she's got Jaco Pastorius with his very melodic bass style, kind of fighting for space in the melody quite successfully. At the same time, it's Joni's show. There's no question about it. And there's something about the versions on here which are wonderful. You've got In France They Kiss on Main Street, Edith and the Kingpin, Coyote, Goodbye Pork Pie Hat, The Dry Cleaner from Des Moines, Amelia. Then Pat Metheny has a solo. Black Crow, Don Elias has a solo that goes into a great version of just conga accompanied Dreamland. Free Man in Paris, which is a pretty poor version. Then band introductions. Furry Sings the Blues. Why Do Fools Fall in Love? Or Furry Sings the Blues is just almost like Joni on her own. It's wonderful. Shadows and Light and God Must Be a Boogeyman and Woodstock to close. There's something about this album where you've got brilliant versions of great songs, but there's a kind of an urgency to the playing here. You can tell it's in a live setting. And even though Hejira is the one that I would normally have said I'll go for, if I'm going to say one album, it's going to be this one. So that's the album I'm going to say. One album only, Shadows and Light. Just a couple of words, a couple of other recommendations while I'm here before I say see you later. Miles of Isles, and the first live album she did, which is the LA Express, as another great band. Brilliant, really good album. A lot of those early songs with band accompaniment, so it brings them to life a little bit. And this one is Grey Market release, A Woman in the East, 1983 Tokyo broadcast. Fantastic sound with a rock band, but really, really good. Just wonderful album. So definitely seek that one out if you're able to. There you go. Well packaged as well. So that's one album only, Joni Mitchell. I'll see you on the next one. Ta-da.